Welcome back, everybody, to another Kicking Tables. My name is Sean,
And I'm Tico.
and today we'd like to welcome Sean Jacquemain, the marketing director of Burnt Island Games, here to talk to us about In Too Deep. Sean, it's good to have another Sean on the show. And
Yes, we got to stick together.
and you spell it correctly too.
Absolutely. The only way to spell it. I see all these other weird spellings,
It
but
is the only way to spell. It is the proper original way to spell the name.
Listen, it's the least amount of letters you can use. I get it.
So, Sean, we want to talk about your game In Too Deep. It's coming to Kickstarter on September 15th. It has a really, really unique story to it. Can you tell us the story behind the game and tell us about the game itself?
yeah, sure. So In Too Deep was first conceived by one of the co-designers, Josh Capel, for a contest, and I think back in 2006, and it actually won the contest. And
Wow.
then he teamed up with Daryl Chow, designer of the Artemis project, and they worked together on it for years. And it's kind of had some different homes. And last year, on our way back from Gen Con, we were all in the car talking about our next Burnt Island game, and this one came up, and it just like immediately hit a chord with all of us, and we knew that we wanted to make this game, and so it's kind of been in hardcore development ever since then.
That's the perfect place to discuss a game is when you're on a car, long car ride.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what is there's actually a great story in the game itself. Like you are agents who actually
Yes.
tap into the minds of criminals. Like it's such a unique concept. Tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea is that it is set in the future, in the year 2087, and we are secret agents trying to stop an evil syndicate from taking over New Dawn City, which is the city that we all live in. And these criminals have all been cybernetically enhanced. And
As they are wont
so
to do in the future.
Exactly, exactly, making them very annoying for us to try and take down. But our agents have found a way to hack into the minds of these criminals, and so what you're actually doing in the game is you're going to be, as you say, like hooking into the mind, going on different jobs with them, different crimes with them, to collect evidence to hopefully take down this syndicate. That is sort of where your intentions are at the start of the game, but there's an interesting push and pull where your intentions may diverge throughout the course of the game, where what you want to accomplish may change dramatically by the end of the game, which is quite interesting. It's one of the neat twists in the game.
Right. Is it a co-op game or is it a competitive game?
So it is a
Or
completely competitive game
okay.
in that there will be a winner, and we are kind of fighting against each other in most aspects of the game. But at the same time, there will be some overlapping goals that players will have to contribute to if you want to accomplish them,
Okay.
and everybody will have a shared goal, except for one player who has conceivably gone in too deep.
Right. Okay. And that's where the name comes from, getting
Yeah.
in too deep into the minds of the criminal.
Yeah, so the idea is that we are good guys, but we're being forced to do bad things to take down this syndicate, and so the worse decisions that we make in the game, perhaps the more points we'll get, or perhaps the more evidence we'll gather, but also we'll gather these things called dilemma cards. And these dilemma cards each come with a reward to them, but also a punishment if you hold on to them by the end of the game. And the person who has become sort of most corrupt in building their case against the syndicate is going to be the player who has gone in too deep. And one of the fun aspects of it is that you really don't know who that's going to be until the end of the game. You certainly could have your suspicions, but it may turn out to be you if you don't, if you're not paying close enough attention, or if you're just not aware of what other people are kind of holding onto and what they're getting rid of. So it makes for a very fun and involved endgame scoring when all of that information gets revealed.
Right.
So that's like sort of like a morality system. It reminds me a little bit of like in Mass Effect, where you have your Renegade and Paragon sort of stuff, where you're trying to sort of walk that fine line as to whether or not you're working on the side of good, or you're very too far into the criminal side.
Yeah, as long as you have absolutely no follow-up questions, then yes, it does sound exactly like
okay. Fair. I have zero follow-up to that.
The way I try to describe it to people is, like, there could be a point in the game where you have been committing crimes, and whenever you commit a story crime that kind of contributes to the narrative of the game, you have a choice to make. You could do something that is not so bad, or something that is really bad, and that'll inform what rewards you're going to get for the crime, for completing that crime. And I try to describe it as sort of shooting the moon a little bit, because there can become a time in the game where you really think you are the player who has gone in too deep, and you may then try to just lean into your underhanded tactics for the greater good, and you may really try to even stop the foiling of the Syndicate for your own personal victory. That is a tactic that people may take on during the game, and which is why I sort of say your intentions, your goals in the game may shift sort of partway through.
You mentioned earlier it is competitive, and it's a 1 to 4 player game. So there's a solo component. Does the game differ much for the solo player, or like how does that work if it's only one person playing?
So in the solo game, there are automatic players, ghost players driven by a deck. So it's as if another player is playing with you, but the actions are driven by a solo deck that is going to be included in the campaign. So it retains much of the same feeling that a two-player game would, but it is possible to accomplish it on your own, and then you're more focused on your personal score rather than the overall sort of arching of the game, the narrative of the game as much.
Right. Okay.
So the game originally had hit Kickstarter in June, and you guys sort of pulled back on that. What led to the decision to pull back on the campaign, and have there been any tweaks since then, since you're relaunching?
Yeah. So obviously not an easy decision. Like, we certainly agonized over that. The major reason was because I think we realized that we hadn't given it a chance to get to enough people, and also we wanted to. We had kind of set a deadline on ourselves that we felt really, a lot of pressure to meet the specific deadline we had met. And I think that we needed more time to finish the art and get the game in front of more people. What we were finding was everybody we were teaching the game to, like, very, very much liked it. We were doing play sessions on Tabletop Simulator and bringing in people, and the weekend before the launch, like, we probably did about 30 sessions with like full tables at each one. And those people were really very much converted into backers. But the world the way it is right now, it's just harder to get the table or the game in front of people on the table. And I think we wanted to give it a little bit more time. At Gen Con a couple weekends ago, we were able to do many different sessions of it. And again, like, we felt the response was so strong, and we didn't feel that we had generated that same excitement in the Kickstarter. And rather than, we thought we would have been okay with it, but we wanted to give the game, because we believe in it so much, a chance to really find its audience.
Right. Okay.
And so there's any number of reasons why we felt like it didn't quite do what we wanted to do right out of the blocks, but we felt like taking it back, spending a little more time on the art, spending a little more time with our messaging, getting the game out, would do it more justice. We love the game, but we also realize that it is not. It is a very unique game. So, if you're talking about a worker placement game, a simple worker placement game, that is very easy to convey to board gamers. You have the language to convey that. In Too Deep is a extraordinarily unique game, and you'll play it, and you will find that it is not. There's no shorthand for explaining it, and so that is something that we had to work on too. Just like developing the shorthand to explain to people in a simple sort of way what the game is all about. The truth is that really you understand it once you've played even a couple rounds of it. You're like, I get what this game is.
Right.
But without, like a lot of major events this year, without having that opportunity to get the game in front of people, we're sort of taking advantage of sort of the digital landscape and this big revival of online gaming, which has been fantastic. But we felt like it needed a little more time to get in front of more people.
That's fair.
Create that natural buzz. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the game board itself is unique, as it's a modular board. How does that work for a modular board, and like what were the decisions behind making that sort of rather than a traditional square rectangle board?
Mm-hmm. So the board itself was originally, I believe, a factory or a complex where you were breaking into as secret agents, and you were kind of accomplishing certain goals inside there. And so that was the original concept of it, and then that translated very well to a city board. The idea of having it modular, obviously, we want it to be as sort of replayable as possible. So in the game itself, the board is modular, so you'll set it out differently every time. In a 6-player game, or excuse me, in a 4-player game, you would have 6 criminals. But we'll have probably about 10 criminals in the box, each with their own sort of different powers. And so every time you play the game, you can put a different combination of criminals together. And also we'll have different sort of storylines in the crime cards. So all of that is sort of in an effort to create a different experience every time you play.
That's awesome.
And I can say, as you get control of the criminals, you start to get to tap into their special powers, and swapping just one criminal in for another dramatically changes the flow of the game and what you're able to do, because their superpowers, their special abilities, are all sort of well attuned to help you accomplish your goals. You just have to kind of know how to use them to your advantage.
So let's touch on that just a quick second, because you mentioned this, the superpowers of the criminals is actually becomes the superpower of the player after they've taken over that criminal, but they have to work their way into the consciousness to bring out that power. Is that correct? Like you can't just use it right away. You have to possess them for a certain amount of time before you can actually use that power. But there's also that balance, the danger of going in too deep, right? So how does that play out in the game? The sort of that balance between, do I stay in or do I get out before it's too late? Like what entices the player to stay? Like there's got to be a reason to stay. You know what I'm saying? How do you balance that in the gameplay itself?
Well, so we've got a sort of resource, almost I'll call it, called Grip, which informs how long you've stayed inside the mind of a particular criminal. So each player on their personal board has a grip track, and after you've sort of hooked into a criminal each turn, you're going to move up on the grip track with every criminal you're hooked into. And so
so you can hook into more than one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So what's interesting is you can control up to 3 criminals at a time, and having two criminals under your control, like your psyche can handle that. But if you hook into a third criminal, you are going to take a dilemma card, sort of a punishment for that, because your consciousness has been so split that you're going to take on sort of some stress from that activity. Generally speaking, the longer you stay in criminals, the more abilities you're going to get with them. When you complete certain crime cards, you're forced to unhook from criminals. So if you complete a story crime card that advances the storyline of one of the narrative plots of the game, you'll unhook from all the criminals you're hooked into at the end of your turn. Generally speaking, being deeper into the minds of the criminals is not a bad thing. It's more the dilemma cards that you take on where you really are faced with a tough decision to make. And those you'll gain through a variety of different things, honestly, in the game.
Right.
Completing cards and various different things that you do in the game might gain you these dilemma cards. And the tough thing about them is that each of them have, as I said, like a corruption number on it, but also a reward. And generally speaking, the better the reward, the higher the corruption. So you're going to be more and more tempted to hold on to the cards that are going to be the worst for you at the end of the game.
And what is the objective of each player? How does the game end, and who's the winner?
Yes, okay. So throughout the course of the game, what you're doing sort of on a turn-to-turn basis is you're hooking into criminals and manipulating their actions around the city to complete crime cards. And what you get for that is intel points and evidence. Then you'll also be filing evidence in different places. There is sort of 3 chapters in the game, and you can file to the individual chapter plot. And as you contribute to the overall plot, what you're trying to put in is evidence of which you have a lot of, because at the end of the game, whatever evidence there is the most of in the overall plot is going to have a greater value for the evidence left in your hands. It's also going to determine whether or not you take down the Syndicate, because if you're playing a 3-player game, what you need to get in there by the end of the game, what you need to contribute as a group at the end of the game is 3 of a kind of 4 different types of evidence. So as a group, you have to kind of be secretly contributing this evidence, and really you don't know until the end of the game whether or not you're going to foil the Syndicate or not. And that has that's kind of like part of the end game reveal. And it has big implications, not only for what the value of the evidence is in your hands, but if you foil the Syndicate, then the player who has gone in too deep suffers a punishment. But if you don't foil the Syndicate, then the player who has gone in too deep has done all of their shady, undercover work, and they suffer no punishment. So,
wow.
So that's the shoot the moon mechanic.
Exactly. So a player who thinks they've gone in too deep may very much try not to foil the Syndicate and hope that they get away with their underhanded methodology.
Now, your website mentions that this is a reboot. Is that just referring to the second Kickstarter?
Yeah. It's just something we tagged on there, just kind of like. I mean, In Too Deep, when it was when we were initially talking about it, in my mind, I had it as like set in the 1980s and being, undercover agents with all these different ideas, and then for many different reasons, we decided to go with like a futuristic approach. But to me, it's always felt like an action movie. Like when you're playing the game, cards that you're completing and stuff like that, it feels like it's set in an action game. So Reboot just kind of felt like a fun way of sort of talking about it, that like we're going to be back on Kickstarter, retooling it a little bit and getting it back out there as soon as possible. We've kind of joked around about sequel games and stuff like that that we can do, but really it refers to just the relaunch.
The relaunch. Now, of course, that relaunch is September 15th.
That's right.
And the same goal as before? Are you going to increase the goal, or are you just bringing it all back as the previous campaign? What tweaks are you going to make to the campaign?
Yeah, so one of the things we've done is worked on the art. We've added some new, I don't even know if we're going to call them stretch goals, but some new sort of reveals that we're going to put out throughout the course of the campaign. I think we're aiming for around the same goal, although I don't know if those decisions have been ultimately made or not. One of the things that we're really trying to do during the campaign, before the campaign, is to encourage as many people as possible to meet up with us on Tabletop Simulator. It is now available.
Awesome.
Sort of a prototype version of it is now sort of publicly available. So we're going to try and run as many sessions as possible leading up to the campaign as well. But in terms of like the structure of the campaign itself, I think, this is not set in stone, but I think what we're going to do is less of a stretch goal method and more of a sort of timely reveal method.
That's fair.
Yeah, less dependent on funding goals and more just like, we'll have a funding goal to fund the project, but just reveal, like, just everybody who backs it will know that they will be getting the full thing. We'll just be revealing it a bit at a time.
That's awesome. Yeah. Before we let you go, Sean, what is the one thing you love about this game? What truly stands out to you when you play this game?
So the best part of the game for me is the narrative that goes on, I think, for each individual player, because each of the crime cards that you're completing have amazing artwork by Dominic Mayer, and it really lays out a narrative. So there is, storylines like, the kidnapping, where you're sort of completing level 1 cards and level 2 cards, and finally the level 3 card. And, the flavor text and the art all kind of come together, married to what you're actually doing on the board. So for me, it's like the narrative of what you see happen. And really, it's quite interesting just to see what other players will do. Like, I've played games where somebody pulled off some incredible move, taking advantage of, like, the abilities in the city or the abilities of the criminal. And it's really satisfying to see all of those come together in a great narrative arc. So, I mean, for me, it's the story.
Yeah. Well, Into Deep sounds absolutely fascinating. I love the story behind it.
It really does, yeah.
So everybody check out the campaign on Kickstarter, September 15th. It's going to be amazing. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today.
Cool. Thank you both. Thank you so much for your time.
It is the year 2087. A global criminal organization known as the Syndicate has set its sights on New Dawn City. You will hack directly into the minds of Syndicate operatives. Can you put together the evidence you need to make it all worthwhile? Or will you go into